Chris Griffin's character has ping-ponged back and forth between being clueless and sweet to being downright manipulative and violent. While some characters in the show had a clear progression into being good or bad, Chris's journey has been conflicting and a little confusing. On the surface, Chris is the talented and underappreciated son typically featured in the background. At the beginning of the series, he showed a passion for art and had wanted to quit the Scouts to focus more on his passion rather than collecting badges. He showed some skill when doodling an animation of raccoons raiding their camp and managed to be picked up by an art dealer for his paintings. Had Chris wanted to, he could have become a major success, but he chose his family above his career. He's also shown to have a lot of potential when it comes to playing baseball. Once again, he was proven to have a clear chance at success had Peter and his friends not grown greedy and sabotaged him.
Oh, hey, fellow teens. Wait a minute. Teenagers don't have wheelchairs.
This had been hard to watch. Though Peter had felt remorse for his friends hurting his son, and Chris had been able to get revenge in his own way, it wasn't a happy ending. Chris was still used by his father to make money off of his talent, making him a target by Joe, Cleveland, and Quagmire. Without a doubt, the most impressive thing Chris accomplished was taking on Space Camp. It's no secret that Chris isn't the sharpest student.
My dad's smarter than your dad.
We have the same dad, idiot.
Yeah, but mine's smarter.
He had been expelled from school a few different times and was written off by his peers and family as being an idiot. This understandably ruined Chris's self-esteem. It only grew worse when, after arriving at Space Camp, he found himself completely out of his depth and begged to return home. When the family came to pick him up, Chris's spirits lifted enough to give them a small tour of the shuttle, only for them all to end up rocketing into the atmosphere. When it looked like the family was going to perish trying to get back to Earth, Chris was able to use what he learned to save their lives, having him declared a hero. Though it may not count as heroic or glamorous, the one thing that's been fairly consistent about Chris's character is that he does manage to have insight into what it means to make a real connection with someone, be it romantic or platonic. Yes, in many ways he's an awkward teenager, but Chris has shown to have genuine chemistry with people. When he stumbled into Meg's job, Carl immediately liked Chris and quickly favored him over Meg. Though chatting about movies and pushing off all of the real work on Meg wasn't the best, Chris was able to use it as leverage to get Carl to hire back his sister. Chris also managed to have some great relationships, at least for a while. Before popularity went to his head, he was able to treat Connie in a way she hadn't been before, helping her to realize that she had settled for less. He offered to take care of Isabella's son while she was in Mexico, and even stepped up to protect them from being attacked. When it came to his brief romance with Taylor Swift, Chris chose to help her save her career rather than make her choose to stay with him. Even with Heather, who was no more than a doll made from stolen items around the neighborhood, Chris showed nothing but respect and adoration. However, none of that meant that Chris was perfect when it came to trying to pursue a relationship. He used Meg, helping to keep a twisted, incestuous relationship between the two of them. He moved on to using Stewie in a similar fashion, lashing out at the infant in ways he observed between Lois and Peter. When he began dating the girl he met at Brian's vet, he was soon convinced by Peter to treat her like garbage. And that's not even taking into account his weird dynamic with Herbert or his passing flings with far older women. One of the most well-known mess-ups he had was when he decided to send a picture of his own genitals to try and impress a girl, leading to Chris becoming a registered sex offender. Chris found himself ostracized from the town, unable to shake the label of a pervert until he decided to undergo chemical castration. This was a bittersweet arc in the storyline, as Chris had to essentially warp himself to be accepted again. It was upsetting to see he snapped out of it when he was given the slightest bit of affection, leading us to believe that his obsession with may in fact be a desperation for closeness his family has denied him. Like any teenage boy, he's not expected to be perfect. He's made some small mistakes, such as stealing from Lois's purse in order to buy shoes that would impress his peers. He chose to escape from his dull life at home by huffing glue, and even went as far as to have an expensive collection brought to him on his request when they won the lottery. The show's writers got very comfortable establishing Chris as someone with a violent and unsettling nature, often playing off his his aggressive tendencies in cutaway gags and throwaway parts of episodes. He was shown luring Peter into a trap that crushed the man's head with logs. He was played off as being the type to watch Peter while he slept, being a figure of terror in the house. In storylines that gave the teenager more screen time, Chris leaned more towards mannerisms that would be a massive red flag. One such storyline involved one of the episodes in which Chris was struggling in his schoolwork, leading him to becoming enrolled in a vocational school. Here, Chris fell in with a crowd of young men who were looking to break into the gangster way of life, using violence to intimidate. At the very least, Chris found a way to get back into school using the very tactics he picked up from his friends. Chris's downfall was established further when the family decided to reverse roles in order to teach Meg and Chris a lesson about adulthood. While Meg was at home taking care of the cleaning, cooking, and caring for Stewie, Chris took up Peter's job at the brewery. Peter had made the job look simple enough, but that was because Peter did the bare minimum on his most productive days. When Chris took over, Angela soon overstepped and overloaded the teenager with far too much work. Chris, being young and inexperienced, allowed himself to be used to the point of exhaustion. Chris wasn't able to be saved from the situation until he had a breakdown and ended up in the hospital after a heart attack. Unfortunately, age didn't work in Chris's favor, with every look into his future being a harsh punch in the gut. In an earlier episode, when Stewie found himself in the future, Chris was shown with a toxic woman. Vanessa constantly berated him and demanded him to put his parents away so they could take over the Griffin home. In another episode showing Stewie as a success, Chris and the rest of the Griffins were struggling and settling for less. As it turned out, in this version of his future, Chris had decided that a great use of his time would be training his genitalia on how to communicate, leading to him carrying on conversations with it.
Well, aren't you going to introduce me? I'm getting to it, if you'll give me a second.
And oddly enough, for Meg to also talk to it as though it was perfectly normal.
Hi, Chris's. How are you?
Same spit, different day.
There were more than a few instances that showed Chris was on his way to a grim future, with him beginning to drink to excess and take out his frustrations on those around him. There's a possibility that Chris had this toxic dynamic with his siblings in order to avoid any outside scrutiny. After all, the only consistent relationship he had outside of his family was with Mr. Herbert, who was only interested in grooming the teen and sharing his own morbid interests. Even Chris himself wasn't optimistic about his life as an adult, seeing himself as likely ending up as a bus driver that parents didn't trust to be around their children. Chris may be able to be saved from a life of hardship. There have been bursts in which he's been able to help in his own way. When Meg had her delusion of Seymour, Chris was able to get through to her and promised to get her help before taking her place at the accident. Though he should have sought outside help considering it was Meg, it was also likely that no one would have taken Chris seriously. Chris has also been shown to have a desire to run his own business and show some independence. Chances are his time working at the brewery and being used by Angela did show Chris his worth. It wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility that the trauma of that ordeal is what pressed Chris to try and run a business on his own terms. Unfortunately, it's very unlikely that Chris will be built up now that he's fallen so far from grace. The show's writers appear content with the idea of keeping Chris dull and unappreciated, capitalizing on his outbursts of rage and his laziness. But what do you all think? Do you think Chris will stay the reckless and subpar character he is?